Hi, Trinidad and Tobago and the world, and welcome to another edition of Strictly Legal with me, your host, Rondell Donawa. And I'm excited once again to be on WESN Content Capital, where we bring you lots of personalities, information about the law and you. Of course, you see me wearing my purple tie because we are celebrating International Women's Month. And of course, as you know, on the 8th of March, the world celebrated International Women's Day with the theme, Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World. And Trinidad and Tobago was no exception. And on this episode of Strictly Legal, we will be highlighting, or I will be highlighting an outstanding female in the legal fraternity, female in leadership in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm excited to have joined me, virtually of course, a legal luminary, a family law expert, a woman and child rights activist, and advocate for equality of treatment of persons in Trinidad and Tobago, Mrs. Lynette Seebaran Suite. But before we start, I would just like to give a little synopsis. Mrs. Suite has loads of experience, she's 43 years experience as a litigator. She has her own firm, Lynette Seebaran and Company, and she has been instrumental in contributing towards critical pieces of legislation relevant to sexual offenses, domestic violence, sexual harassment, and many other areas of the law. And Mrs. Seebaran Suite was also a former chairman of the Equal Opportunities Commission, as well as she serves as member and legal advisor on many boards and institutions, that's statutory boards and institutions. Mrs. Seebaran Suite, good morning.
My pleasure to be here, Rondell, on the occasion of International Women's, let us call it week for year 2021.
And we are so excited to have you with us, and we appreciate you consenting to be here, because many persons look up to you, especially myself, practicing in the legal fraternity and through family law and the courts. So thank you. Mrs. Suite, we have a lot to get through. Now, as you know, the theme this year was Women in Leadership. And of course, as a female leader, do you think that women have been given an equal opportunity and, recognition and respect as influential leaders in Trinidad and Tobago?
I would say so. I would say that women have had their fair share of roles in leadership in Trinidad and Tobago at the level not only of the parliament, but at the level of the public sector and the private sector as well. We still have not achieved the kinds of international goals that have been set. For example, we still haven't achieved, we certainly know we are near 50%, which is the goal. But, the intermediate target of 30%, we still have not. One area in which we have done quite well is in the area of public sector leadership, because we are at about 60% of women in leadership in the public sector. And there's a lot to be done, but I would say that women in Trinidad do have a good voice in leadership.
In leadership, of course. And you have a quite impressive and expansive resume, especially in the field of the law. Now, how have you been able to succeed in a profession that is deemed as male dominant and supposedly sexist in the legal fraternity?
We have been more so than now, because one was the professions are after the 1977, it was less so. And I would say that confidence and preparedness would have been major ingredients in, if you want to call it, my success. I guess I would always have been known as an outspoken and opinionated person from childhood. And so I think that this just carried over, shall we say, perhaps as a personality trait. And I remember in high school, I was in debating, and, I also came from a family background, shall I say, with a social conscience. Both my parents were involved in leadership and in giving in their communities, and I followed from this example.
So of course, leadership is no exception or no stranger to you, especially in the local courts.
for many years. And I would say that from in or about the year 2004, I have been practicing exclusively as a family law practitioner. And I would have launched my own law firm as early as 1992. Prior to that, I was in civil law chambers led by the former Chief Justice Michael de la Bastide, and operating in a family of legal luminaries, I would say, from whom I learned a lot. But from early on, I would say that I would have established myself in the field of family law. And I recall from very early in my career, in the very early 80s, engaging in what then would have been a somewhat controversial exercise of public education in the law. And I recall that TTT in an earlier incarnation had a talk show at 6:30 in the afternoon. It was hosted by Tony Dial, Issues and Ideas. And that was my earliest opportunity, I think, in this sort of media, in engaging in public education. And I would say that I launched my public career in bringing to the attention of the nation some of the innovations and improvements that have been brought.
Yes.
Came into force in the very early 70s, and which was not very well known to the population. Prior to that, there were very restrictive grounds of divorce, and the question of consensual divorce was not known to the law. And the grounds as well were discriminatory between men and women. And also, the court did not as yet have the power to actually change property rights as they existed on paper for the purpose of making awards on divorce. So I was instrumental, I think, let me just say, I think.
I'm sure you will. Yeah. So we would take a break. I think we're having some internet problems, so we will take a break and we'll be right back on WESN. You are watching Strictly Legal. And we're back, and we've sorted out the connectivity. So therefore, thank you very much for being with us, Mrs. Seebaran Suite. And just to continue the conversation, now you have been highly instrumental in bringing about passages of legislations far back as the Sexual Offences Act of 1986 and many other pieces, the Domestic Violence Act of 1986 and its amendment in 1991. More particularly, the Domestic Violence Amendment Act of 2020. Now, how practical do you think that these amendments will protect the most vulnerable in society?
I think that we have made some very significant improvements in the domestic violence regime with the amendments that came in July of last year. First of all, the category of applicants has been increased to include persons in dating relationships. There is a whole new suite of protections for children. The definition of domestic violence has been broadened in terms of what is considered emotional and psychological abuse, a lot of controlling behavior, the new frontier of violence, which is cyberbullying, that sort of thing. So all of that has been accomplished, as well as there has been the creation of an ability on the part of the police to obtain an emergency protection order on the spot by calling a judge, so that you now have the possibility of the emergency protection order. We also have now introduced something now trying to operationalize, where between the police and the court, an assessment can be made as to how serious the threat is to women. Yeah. And this is to head off the ever-increasing incidence of women being killed at the hands of their intimate partners that, is horrifying the nation on a day-to-day basis. So the police and the courts and the attorneys are all trying to pull together to improve the mechanisms for the protection of women.
And has
But
it
we
been
always
working?
have to remember. We always have to remember that we are our brothers and sisters' keepers, and it is incumbent upon persons who observe domestic violence to make sure that they put a hand to lend a hand for the protection of vulnerable family members.
And do you think that this new piece of amendment is working or should work in the future?
Well, it's still in its stages of infancy because the legislation was passed in July of last year, and a significant amount of training is going on both within the judiciary and among the attorneys as to the whole operation of the mechanism. The police have introduced a gender-based violence unit, and they are far, I think, more alert to their duties and responsibilities to respond and to respond appropriately in the situation of domestic violence. One can never have too many shelters and support services,
Yes.
and that is always a question of resources. But I think that we are on the up and up in terms of improving our responses. There are
Yes.
units in all of the major police centers. The police themselves are being trained, and I think that even though you still have complaints about the readiness response of the police and the responsiveness of the courts, I think that there is a lot of public awareness and general societal awareness about the evil of intimate partner violence, and the society is really having another wave of grappling with this problem. Now, so we do have a very good model
Yes.
of legislation in Trinidad and Tobago. The Domestic Violence Act, introduced in 1999, improved in 1991, improved in 1999, and now again in 2020. But I think that we have to now take a step back and look to the question of prevention, the question of what support is given to vulnerable families,
Yes.
whether by virtue of issues of poverty, whether by issues of very young mothers, and also the question of the social safety net for the provision for support for very young families. So children from the very youngest age get all of the emotional support that they need, the economic support, the physical support that they need, so that they become healthy, contributing members of society. We get away from the stereotypes in socialization where men are led to think that they have a certain role, girl children are led to think that they have an opposite role. And then it results in very unhealthy, dysfunctional relationships.
Agreed.
And of course, we see the end result of it at the end of the day, where we have these unfortunate femicides taking place on a weekly basis. So distressing to the nation, so distressing to those left behind.
Yes.
You see, so I think that beyond the question of the excellent legislative models, mobilizing the police, mobilizing civil society in terms of shelters, in terms of NGOs, we have a lot of that. We still do not seem to have hit upon the exact formula for creating a regime where women can exit abusive relationships safely, where they will then be able to rely on employment, job training, safe housing for themselves and their children. And this is what was highlighted in a 2017 IDB study on women's health.
Yeah.
That notwithstanding all that we have done, we still have these major gaps.
Yes.
So there is a role, for example, for state agencies such as the Housing Development Authority to prioritize the needs of single women, especially young women with children who are in women-led households where they are in need of secure shelter for themselves and their children.
Yeah.
You see, so job training, job opportunities, secure housing, and to permit women to exit abusive relationships safely, because that is when you will observe women at the greatest danger of extreme violence from their intimate partners.
But of course, they have to be willing. But of course, they have to be willing to want to exit this relationship.
This is it. Well, we have recently run a series of webinars within the legal profession,
Yes.
and in which both the judicial and the police have participated. And what the psychologists have cautioned us is that you have to come at providing support for victims of domestic violence from a non-judgmental position. And you have to be prepared on every occasion that the person comes forward for help to give your assistance afresh.
Yes.
You cannot take the position that, well, we advise you to exit the relationship on the last occasion and you did not. So we're not going to help you now. The psychosocial dimensions of intimate partner violence and the long-term effects on the psyche of the survivor have to be more deeply understood. And also the difficulty of finding the necessary alternatives, as I said, critical is housing in financial support, so that a woman may not easily be able to exit a relationship where she is unsure as to where she's going to live, and how her children are going to be supported, and how her safety is going to be provided. So frequently women feel that the only option that they have is to remain or to return.
Yes.
And so certainly the police have been engaging in training, and attorneys have been training themselves to understand that they must bring a level of non-judgmental support to victims, especially long-term chronic victims of intimate partner violence, and to train them perhaps for preparing for, as it were, exit strategies. Exit strategies. You don't want to be cornered. You don't want to be doing things to precipitate and inflame a situation.
Yes.
You know, you may have to deal with drug abuse. You may have to deal with alcoholism. You know, you may have to deal with mental illness in your partner. So you have to train yourself to understand the situation that you're in and to plan for your exit strategy.
Now, Mrs. Seebaran Suite, I want to touch on, because this conversation is hours long, particularly in light of so many challenges. Now, what I want to discuss or touch on is your role or your stint as equal opportunities, as chairman of the Equal Opportunities Commission. It was between 2012 to 2014 and 2020. Now, do you think that the Equal Opportunity Commission had the correct legislative framework to really decide or operate in terms of equal opportunity for everyone in Trinidad and Tobago?
The Equal Opportunity Act had a very good framework for the recognition of discrimination on a number of status grounds. It could deal with sex, it could deal with religion, it could deal with geographic origin, it could deal with disability, and so a broad spectrum of marital status. It could deal with a broad spectrum of the various status grounds upon which you could apply for relief from discrimination. But there was one major flaw in the legislation, which from the inception of my term and my board, we have been agitating across various attorneys general for a change. And that is with the definition of sex. Because the definition of sex discrimination specifically excluded the LGBTQ community from being able to access relief for sex discrimination. And this is reflected as well in the domestic violence legislation. Most of the categories of persons, except with respect to dating relationships, most of the categories of relationship covered by the domestic violence legislation require the applicant and the respondent to be of a different sex. So we definitely have not made the kind of advance that we need there to bring ourselves in line with our obligations under our international treaties in line with best practices in human rights. And I dare say that in Trinidad and Tobago, we do not have a society which wishes to discriminate against persons on the basis of their sexual orientation.
And this is where
study after study has shown this.
Mm-hmm.
Study after study has shown this, that when you ask the question in a general population, do you feel that a person should be denied services, should be denied employment, or should be discriminated against on the basis of their sexual orientation? The answer is no.
Yeah.
Clear. In excess of 70% of the population gives that answer. But we have not found politicians at any party level that are sufficiently courageous to take this bull by the horns. But then,
what about the sexual harassment legislation? Because I know you are now being instrumental, and I know the Attorney General would have announced that Cabinet is deciding to bring this before Parliament. Does the sexual harassment or the proposed sexual harassment legislation provides for protection of these communities?
Certainly. The Attorney General, we have been working, the Equal Opportunity Commission and other actors in civil society, the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Ministry of Labor, many other actors have been working or throughout 2020 on generating a sexual harassment bill that would provide protection both in the area of labor and in the area of discrimination law to make it perfectly clear, that sexual harassment is a category of sexual discrimination. Indeed, the Equal Opportunity Commission at this time has before the Court of Appeal a decision of the Equal Opportunity Tribunal, which decided to the contrary, which decided in our view and in the view of all of the legal precedents across the Commonwealth, that sexual harassment is not a category of sex discrimination for the purpose of the Equal Opportunity Commission receiving complaints. So that was clearly wrong. That interpretation of the term sex discrimination to exclude sexual harassment was clearly wrong. It was appealed, and it is before the Court of Appeal now. The case has been argued, and it is awaiting decision, so that we are confident that sexual harassment will be declared to be a category of sex discrimination, as is established, as I said, across the Commonwealth in the case law, straight up to the House of Lords, the Supreme Court in the United Kingdom, whose judgments have highly persuasive authority, Trinidad and Tobago being a common law country and a Commonwealth country. So that we are not waiting for the legislation to declare that. The legislation would simply codify what is already clearly the law. And if you look at the precedents coming out of the industrial court, sexual harassment has clearly been found to be behavior which is contrary to good industrial relations practice, and which has caused relief to be granted against companies who permit management systems which permit sexual harassment in the workplace and do not provide remedies for people who are affected.
Mrs. Seebaran Suite,
it's clear in the case law, both in the labor regime and the international discrimination and human rights regime.
Yes.
So we are merely waiting on a pronouncement from the Court of Appeal.
Mrs. Seebaran Suite, I'm afraid our time is up in this segment. However, I believe that we need to continue this conversation because there's many things that we don't know, or persons within the public doesn't know what is being done in the background and the work that the legal luminaries are doing. So thank you so much for giving of your time and your experience and expertise, and we'll be seeing you again.
You can have me back whenever.
With your consent.
We are mutually available, my dear.
Thank you very much. So you have been watching WESN, you have been watching Strictly Legal. I will see you next week for another episode. Thank you and goodbye.